My wife died in March, and by June my daughter-in-law had moved out. She didn't take much with her. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter when I woke up. I didn't open it right away. I put it in the drawer next to the bills. The house was quiet after Linda died. Not the kind of quiet you notice right away. Just the absence of small sounds. No coffee brewing at 6. No hum of the hairdryer from the bathroom. No keys on the counter when I walked in from the garage. I kept going to work. Same route. Same parking spot at the plant. I'd been there 32 years. Maintenance supervisor. I knew every pipe, every valve, every guy on the floor. It was what I did. My son Jake came by on Sundays. His wife Sarah came with him. She'd go straight to the kitchen. Open the fridge. Check what was expired. Wipe down the counters. I'd sit in the living room with Jake. We'd watch whatever game was on. You doing okay, Dad? I'm fine. Eating enough? Yeah. That was usually it. Jake would check his phone. I'd keep my eyes on the TV. Sarah would finish in the kitchen and sit down with us. Nobody said much. Sarah had always been quiet around me, even before Linda got sick. She'd help with dinner on holidays, but she didn't talk much. Linda would tell her what to do. Sarah would do it. I'd be in the living room, half watching football, half listening to the two of them move around the kitchen. Linda never complained about Sarah to me, but I could tell. The way she'd pause before answering when I asked if Sarah was coming over. The way she'd reorganize the dishes after Sarah left. Small things. I didn't ask about it. After Linda died, Sarah started coming more often. Twice a week at first. Then 3 times. She'd bring groceries. Make a casserole. Leave it in the fridge with instructions written on a note card. I'd eat it over the next few days. It was fine. Not Linda's cooking, but fine. One afternoon, Sarah asked if she could go through Linda's closet. I was in the garage. She came out and stood in the doorway. Would it be okay if I sorted through some of Mom's things? I didn't look up from the workbench. If you want, I just thought. It might be time. Do what you need to do. She went back inside. I heard her moving around upstairs for a while. When I came in later, there were 3 boxes in the hallway. Clothes, mostly. A few books. Some of Linda's scarves. I can take these to Goodwill, Sarah said. Okay. Unless you want to keep anything? No, it's fine. She loaded the boxes into her car. I didn't help. I stayed in the kitchen, looking out the window. Sarah left in early June. Jake had been traveling more for work. Sales job. He'd be gone 4 or 5 days at a time. Sarah was at the house alone. Then one Tuesday I came home and saw a note on the counter. It was from Sarah. Staying at my sister's for a few days. There's meatloaf in the fridge. Heated at 350 for 20 minutes. I heated the meatloaf. Ate half of it. Put the rest back. 3 days became a week, then 2 weeks. Jake came by on a Sunday alone. Where's Sarah? She's at her sister's. Still? Yeah. Everything okay? Jake looked at me. Then he looked away. I don't know. You two fighting? Not really. I didn't push it. We watched the game. He left before halftime. I kept going to work. Same mornings. Same drive. Same guys. One of them, Ray, asked if I was doing all right. Fine. You sure? You seem tired. I'm fine. He didn't ask again. At home, I started noticing things Sarah had changed. The dish towels were different. She'd replaced them a few weeks back. The soap by the sink was a different brand. She'd bought it because Linda's brand was discontinued. Small things. They were everywhere. I opened the drawer where I'd put the envelope. It was still there. I took it out. Held it. It had some weight to it. Money, probably. I didn't open it. I put it back. I thought about Linda and Sarah in the kitchen together. Thanksgiving, maybe 5 years ago, Sarah was chopping onions. Linda was at the stove watching her. Not like that. You're cutting them too big. Sarah stopped. Put the knife down. How should I do it? Smaller, like this. Linda took the knife. Showed her. Gave it back. Sarah started again. Linda stood there, arms crossed, watching. I was in the doorway. I didn't say anything. Later that night, Sarah barely spoke at dinner. Linda didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did. I couldn't tell. I thought about saying something to Linda back then, asking if she'd been too hard on Sarah. But I didn't. It wasn't my place. That's what I told myself. After Linda died, I think Sarah kept coming because she felt like she had to. Not because I asked. I didn't ask for anything. But she kept coming anyway. Cleaning. Cooking. Organizing. Like it was her job now. I didn't thank her enough. Maybe I didn't thank her at all. She'd leave a casserole and I'd just nod. She'd ask if I needed anything and I'd say no. She was doing all this and I just let her. One night I tried to remember the last conversation I'd had with Sarah. Not small talk, a real conversation. I couldn't think of one. In all the years she'd been married to Jake, I don't think we'd ever talked about anything that mattered. I didn't know what she did at work. I didn't know what she liked. I didn't know if she was happy. I thought about Linda. Did Linda know? Did they ever talk? I don't think so. Linda would tell Sarah what to do, and Sarah would do it. That was the relationship. I pulled the envelope out again. This time I opened it. There was $100 inside, and a note, Sarah's handwriting, for groceries or whatever you need. I'm sorry I can't come by as much. I folded the note. Put it back with the money. Put the envelope back in the drawer. Why was she sorry? She didn't owe me anything. She'd been coming by for months, doing things I should have been doing myself, and she was apologizing. I thought about calling her, picking up the phone, asking if she was okay, telling her she didn't need to apologize. But I didn't. I didn't know what to say, and the longer I waited, the harder it got. Jake came by again a few weeks later. He looked tired. We sat in the living room. He didn't turn on the game. Dad, I need to talk to you. Okay. Sarah and I. We're taking some space. Space? Yeah. We're not getting divorced or anything. We just need time. I didn't say anything. She's been having a hard time, Jake said. With what? With everything. With Mom dying. With coming here. She doesn't have to come here. I know, but she felt like she should. Why? Jake looked at me. Because of Mom. I waited. Sarah felt like Mom never really liked her, he said, and after Mom died, she thought maybe she could make up for it by helping you. But it was hard for her, being here, doing all that. I sat there. Did you know that? Jake asked. About Mom and Sarah? I didn't answer right away. I knew they weren't close. Dad, it was more than that. What do you mean? Mom was. She was tough on Sarah. You had to have seen it. I had. I'd seen it. But I'd never said anything. Not to Linda. Not to Sarah. I'd just stayed out of it. I should have said something, I said. To who? To your mother. To Sarah. I don't know. Jake shook his head. It's not your fault. Feels like it is. We sat there for a while. Jake got up to leave. Tell Sarah I'm sorry, I said. For what? For not saying anything. For letting it go on. Jake nodded. He left. I sat in the living room after he was gone. The house was quiet. Same quiet as always, but it felt different now. I thought about all the times I'd sat in this room while Linda and Sarah were in the kitchen. All the times I'd heard the tension in their voices and done nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that they'd work it out, but they never did. And now Linda was gone. And Sarah was gone too, and I was here. I opened the drawer again, took out the envelope. Read the note again. I'm sorry I can't come by as much. She was still apologizing. Even after everything. I put the note back, closed the drawer. I didn't know what to do with any of this. I didn't know if there was anything I could do. I just knew that Sarah had been here, doing things she didn't have to do, and I'd let her, without saying thank you, without asking if she was okay, without standing up for her when Linda was still alive. I went to bed, stared at the ceiling, thought about Linda, thought about Sarah, thought about Jake, thought about all the things I didn't say. The ceiling didn't have any answers. I closed my eyes. Didn't sleep much. The silver sedan had pulled away hours ago, but the ghost of Sarah's presence lingered in the kitchen, like the smell of burnt toast, sharp, lingering, and impossible to ignore. I stayed in my recliner. The sun crawled across the living room carpet, moving inch by inch until the gold turned to gray, and the gray turned to a deep, bruised purple. I didn't reach for the lamp. In the dark, the house felt larger, the corners stretching out into shadows that I didn't recognize. I sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It's a sound you never notice when people are talking, but when you're alone, it sounds like a jet engine idling in the next room. 3 days later, the silence was broken by the sound of a key turning in the front lock. It wasn't the soft, hesitant turn Sarah used to make. This was a hard, impatient twist. Jake. He didn't knock. He didn't call out a greeting. He just stepped into the foyer, his heavy work boots thudding against the hardwood floor I'd polished just the day before. He looked like a man who had been driving through a storm for 10 hours, eyes bloodshot, tie loosened, a dark shadow of stubble covering his jaw. He didn't even take off his coat. He just stood there in the middle of the living room, looking at me like I was a stranger he'd found trespassing in his childhood home. "I talked to her, Dad," he said. His voice was gravelly, stripped of the usual polite tone he used when he checked in on me. I didn't get up. My knees felt like they were made of glass that morning. She came for her slow cooker, Jake. That's all. I tried to give her the money back, but she wouldn't take it. Jake let out a short, jagged laugh that sounded more like a cough. He walked over to the window and stared out at the street, his back to me. "The money. You're still worried about the damn money? Sarah is staying at her sister's place in Akron, sleeping on a twin mattress on the floor because she can't stand to be in our house right now. She's staring at the wall, wondering if her entire marriage was just a sequel to the hell my mother put her through. And you're worried about a $100 bill in a kitchen drawer. I told her I saw it," I said, my voice sounding thin, echoing off the empty walls. I told her I knew what Linda was doing. I thought that would... I don't know. I thought it would matter. Jake turned around then. He stepped into the light of the one lamp I'd finally turned on, and I saw the anger there. It wasn't the kind of anger that shouts, it was the kind that burns cold and steady. "You saw it?" Jake whispered. "Dad, you sat 3 feet away from them for 15 years. 15 years of Sundays. You watched Mom tell her she wasn't good enough, that she didn't know how to cook, how to clean, how to raise a family. You watched Mom pick her apart like she was a piece of bad fruit. And what did you do? You reached for the remote. You asked if there was any more dip. You went out to the garage to check the oil every time Sarah started to cry. I was trying to keep the peace, Jake. I said, and even as the words left my mouth, they felt like a lie. Your mother. She was a force of nature. If I'd stood up to her, this house would have been a war zone every single day. I did it for us. I did it so we could have a normal life. A normal life for who? Jake stepped closer, his shadow looming over my chair. For you. You did it for you, Dad. You didn't want the noise. You didn't want the headache. So you let Sarah take every hit, every insult, every cold shoulder. You used her as a human shield so you could have your quiet Sunday afternoons. You weren't keeping the peace. You were just protecting your own comfort. I looked down at my hands. The skin was paper-thin, spotted with age. I thought about all those afternoons. The sound of the game on the TV, the muffled voices from the kitchen, the feeling of tension in the air that was so thick you could taste it. I'd known. Of course I'd known. I'd just convinced myself that my silence was a form of strength, a way to keep the family together. But sitting here now, with my son looking at me with nothing but exhaustion and resentment, I realized it was just cowardice wrapped in a flannel shirt. I'm an old man, Jake, I said, trying to find some ground to stand on. I've worked 32 years. I've buried my wife. I don't have the energy for these battles anymore. It's over. Everyone is gone. That's the problem, Dad, Jake said, his voice dropping to a flat, dead tone. For you, it's over because the noise has stopped. You got exactly what you wanted. No one's arguing. No one's crying. The house is perfectly still. But Sarah isn't gone like Mom is gone. She's out there hurting. And I'm the one trying to figure out if I'm just like you, if I'm the kind of man who lets the people he loves drown, just so he doesn't have to get his feet wet. He reached out and picked up his car keys from the coffee table. The brass clinked against the wood, a small, sharp sound that felt like a gunshot in the silence. Don't call her, Dad, Jake said, walking toward the door. And don't call me for a while. You wanted the quiet. You worked your whole life to make sure nothing disturbed your peace. Well, congratulations. You finally got it. Hope it's everything you thought it would be. He didn't slam the door this time. He closed it softly, which was somehow worse. The click of the latch was final. I heard his boots on the porch, the groan of his car door, and the engine cranking to life. I watched his taillights fade into the darkness of the Cleveland suburbs. I stood up, my joints aching, and walked into the kitchen. I opened the drawer. The $100 bill was still there, tucked next to the spare light bulbs and the takeout menus. I took it out and held it. It didn't feel like money. It felt like a heavy, cold weight. I thought about calling him back. I thought about driving to Akron, finding that sister's house, and standing on the porch until Sarah came out, so I could finally, for once in my life, say the right thing. But I didn't. I didn't know what the right thing was, and the longer I stood there in the fluorescent light of the kitchen, the more I realized that the silence I had built wasn't a shield anymore. It was a cage. I put the money back. I closed the drawer. I went to the sink and washed the one coffee mug I'd used that morning, drying it until it shone, and placing it back in the cupboard in its exact designated spot. I walked back to my recliner and sat down. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars sweep across the ceiling, one after another, rhythmic and predictable. The house was quiet. Just like I liked it, just like I'd chosen. The sound of Jake's car fading into the distance was the last real thing that happened in this house. After that, time didn't seem to move forward, it just pooled around my feet like stagnant water. I stood by the kitchen window for a long time, watching the spot where his taillights had vanished into the humid Cleveland night. The streetlights outside hummed a low electrical buzz that felt like it was vibrating inside my own skull. I looked down at my reflection in the darkened window pane. I looked like a man waiting for a bus that had already passed 30 years ago. I turned back to the kitchen. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, twice, then stayed on with a cold, sterile glare. Everything was exactly where it belonged. The salt and pepper shakers were aligned. The dish towel was folded perfectly over the oven handle. This was the order I had maintained, the peace I had protected at any cost. I walked over to the drawer again. My hand hovered over the handle. It was just a piece of wood and brass, but it felt as heavy as a lead vault door. I pulled it open. The $100 bill was still there. I picked it up. The paper was crisp, a little oily from the kitchen air. I stared at Sarah's handwriting on that small note. It was neat, the kind of handwriting someone uses when they're trying to stay composed while their heart is breaking. "I'm sorry I can't come by as much." The words felt like a physical weight in my palm. Why was she the one apologizing? She had been the one scrubbing the floors Linda used to criticize. She had been the one bringing casseroles to a man who barely looked up from the evening news to thank her. And I had let her do it. I had let her carry the guilt of Linda's bitterness, even after Linda was 6 feet under the Ohio clay. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway. I found myself standing in front of the door to the master bedroom. I hadn't changed a thing since March. Linda's perfume, that heavy floral scent she'd worn for 40 years, still clung to the curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sighing under my weight. I looked at the closet door. Sarah had been in there, sorting through the scarves and the sensible shoes. She had stood in this room, likely feeling Linda's eyes on her from every photograph on the dresser, and she had done the work I couldn't bring myself to do. I thought about the word Jake used. Shield. I leaned back against the headboard and closed my eyes. I remembered a rainy Tuesday, maybe 7 years ago. We were all in the kitchen. Sarah was trying to make a pie crust, something Linda was famous for in our neighborhood. I was in the living room, ostensibly reading the paper, but I could hear every word through the open archway. "You're overworking the dough, Sarah," Linda had said, her voice like a sharpening stone. "It's going to be tough. Jake likes it flaky. I thought I showed you this last summer." I'd heard the silence that followed, the sound of the rolling pin hitting the counter. I'd seen Sarah's shadow on the wall, her head bowed. I could have walked in there. I could have said, "Linda, leave her be. It's just a pie." I could have taken the tension out of the room with one sentence. But I didn't. I just turned the page of my newspaper. I let the crinkle of the paper drown out the sound of Sarah's shaky intake of breath. I chose the quiet. I always chose the quiet. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. The plaster was cracked in the corner, a thin line like a lightning bolt. I wondered if Sarah knew. Did she know that every time I stayed silent, I was making a choice? Did she realize that my neutrality was actually a betrayal? Jake was right. I hadn't been keeping the peace. I'd been keeping my own skin safe. I had let 2 women fight a war for decades, and I'd just sat on the sidelines, waiting for the smoke to clear so I could have my dinner in peace. The house groaned a settling sound in the floorboards. I got up and walked to the closet. I pulled it open. It was mostly empty now, thanks to Sarah. Just a few of Linda's coats remained, hanging like hollow people in the dark. I reached out and touched the wool of her heavy winter coat. It was scratchy and cold. I thought about calling Jake. I went as far as picking up the cordless phone from the nightstand. I stared at the glowing green numbers. 10:42 p.m. He'd be back in Akron by now. Or maybe he was sitting in a bar somewhere, staring at a glass of whiskey, wondering how he ended up with a father who was a ghost before he was even dead. I wanted to tell him something. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was." But the words felt like dry sand in my mouth. I didn't press the buttons. I put the phone back on the charger. I walked back to the living room and sat in my recliner. I didn't turn on the TV this time. I didn't want the noise of the commentators or the bright fake colors of the commercials. I just sat there in the dark, watching the headlights of a passing car sweep across the wall. One light, then another, then darkness again. Rhythmic. Predictable. I realized then that this was the cost of the quiet I had fought so hard for. It wasn't peace. It was a vacuum. I had spent 32 years at the plant, managing pressure valves and fixing leaks, ensuring that everything flowed smoothly and nothing ever exploded. I had brought that same mentality home. I had managed the pressure in my family by letting it bleed out through Sarah. I had fixed the leaks by pretending they didn't exist, and now the pipes were empty. The system was dry. I reached out and touched the armrest of the recliner. The fabric was worn smooth where my hands had rested for years. This chair was my fortress. From here I didn't have to engage. From here I could be a spectator in my own life. I thought about the red slow cooker Sarah had come to fetch. Such a small thing. A kitchen appliance. But it was hers. It was something she owned in a house where nothing else belonged to her. And I had let her walk away with it, carrying years of resentment in her heart, while I sat here and worried about a $100 bill. I stood up and walked to the front door. I opened it and stepped out onto the porch. The night air was thick and smelled of damp earth and car exhaust. The neighborhood was silent. Most of my neighbors were like me, retired, settled, tucked away behind their curtains. We were all living in these quiet boxes we'd built for ourselves. I looked at the empty driveway. I imagined the silver sedan sitting there again. I imagined walking down the steps, opening the passenger door and saying, "Sarah, stay for a minute. Let's talk about the onions. Let's talk about the pie crust. Let's talk about everything I didn't say for 15 years. But the driveway was empty. The street was empty. I went back inside and locked the door. I turned the deadbolt, the click sounding like a final punctuation mark. I walked back to the kitchen, opened the drawer, and took out the envelope. I didn't put it back this time. I walked to the trash can, paused for a second, then set it back on the counter. I couldn't throw it away and I couldn't use it. It was just an object now, a monument to a debt I could never repay. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked through the dark house, guided by the moonlight coming through the windows. I went back to my chair. I didn't sleep. I just sat there waiting for the sun to come up over the Cleveland skyline, knowing that when it did, the house would still be quiet. Exactly the way I had always wanted it. Exactly the way I'd made it. The morning light would eventually hit the carpet. The birds would start their singing in the oak tree, and I would get up and make a pot of coffee for one. I'd wash the mug, I'd dry the counter, and I'd wait for a phone call that I knew, deep down, wasn't coming. I sat in the stillness, listening to the heavy rhythmic thumping of my own heart, the only sound left in a house that was finally, perfectly at peace.